What we're talking about today is more, I'm going to get out of your way and stand down here, is more about the how. Sarah and I both come from environments in which we're helping to build the creative teams for something that Kevin talked at the top of the hour here about balancing brand and performance marketing. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We'll dig in.
I'm Sarah Juselius. I'm the Director of Creative Operations at DraftKings. Prior to that, I did 2 tours at Arnold Worldwide in Boston, agency side, and I also have a bit of experience in the tech space working at LogMeIn in Boston.
Yeah, and I'm Bill Weiss, Director of Creative Operations at HelloFresh here in New York. And I came from DraftKings before, where I met Sarah, Chipotle Mexican Grill, which is the exact opposite of performance marketing, until more recently, and Christie's just down the street. So what we want to talk about today, I think, is, I started my career a fair bit ago, and the premise here is gone are the days of creative specialists, where I once might have an illustrator sitting in the corner who would just hand draw Chipotle bags once or twice a year. We now have to be much more fluid with the skill sets. And so companies like those and like HelloFresh and like DraftKings that are aiming for top of funnel awareness as well as lower funnel performance need to find in our creative teams an ability to balance those skill sets. How are we building teams to address brand and performance as well?
So the way that we answer that is we build a creative team powered by creative operations to really service the business across the board. You can support the performance marketers in your group as well as the brand marketers. It's the same team with varied skill sets, able to facilitate both types of requests.
Yeah, the rudimentary graphic on the right there is, what we're talking about here is, and we'll get into teams that we've stepped into and how we've built this out, but we're talking about performance-driven groups for the most part, especially at HelloFresh, especially at DraftKings, that have taken on conceptual thinkers to address some of that higher-level brand thinking. But the fluidity, that dotted line in the middle, that those conceptual thinkers need to be flexible in their roles to be able to do some of the performance work as well.
So how do we start to dig into this? Taking stock and getting started. The first thing is building relationships with your stakeholders. It's really critical to do so. You need to understand the work that they're going to be requesting of you and how that helps them reach their goals for the business. You need to talk with them about getting upstream visibility into what's coming down the pipe for your teams. It's also really important to establish these relationships so that when there's moments of conflict or collision course things that are going to meet and come to a head, that you have those relationships to discuss and be able to prioritize with your partners.
Yeah, I know creative ops means a little something different everywhere, people, processes, and systems. And for me, especially in startups or post-startups like DraftKings and post-startups like HelloFresh, it's been around the people. It's been around forging relationships and getting from sort of out of our isolated world, myopic world of just creative, and getting back into the business to understand what the needs of the business are. That's the biggest role that I think we can help to play as creative ops professionals.
Next is really gaining an understanding of the work. So what are the different teams that are requesting work from you? I think there needs to be an awareness that oftentimes the performance drivers in your organization are going to take precedence over the brand teams that are requesting work. You need to be able to answer both and carve out space for the brand work, otherwise it won't become a priority for the group. What types of work are you seeing from the different channels? Are there quick turn design-oriented tasks like logo design or banner creation? Do you have groups in your organization that require templates to be created to allow them to operate more efficiently and nimbly? We've been seeing a ton of animation requests within our organization. So things like animated banners or GIFs, cinemagraphs, and then all the way up the ladder to integrated campaign work. Lastly, each of the teams that you're supporting is going to have their own rhythm and cadence. You need to be familiar with that to know when it's going to hit your team and also how things weave together across the groups in your organization.
Yeah, and part of that is just getting the relationships, the previous slide, and really being embedded. If we were consultants, we might come in and do a 6-month hit and run and move on, recommending best practice. But here, I think for us, especially in these smaller brands, it's really important that we get embedded with these groups and understand the lay of the land. And so I think the takeaway from this slide is you can't possibly do the puzzle until you have all the pieces on the table. This is something that's very important in the first 30, 60, 90 days, depending on your leeway, to get an understanding of the full scope of the work that this team is already supporting.
So once you have that understanding, it's incumbent upon you to really map it out and understand what's going to be going on across the course of the year. So every business has base level work. This is the day-to-day that keeps you busy from start to end of the day. You also have a seasonality or tentpole moments that the business will rally behind. So for you, that might be Christmas or back to school. At DraftKings in the month of August, we embrace organized chaos to get ready for NFL season launch. In January, when NFL is tapering down, we're really ramping up again for PGA Masters as well as the MLB season launch. So having a grasp on those two things, the seasonality and the base level work, is going to allow you to better accommodate unforeseen opportunities that arise in the business that you want to create work for. It will also give you that look across the horizon to see and identify when things are on a collision course and be able to plan for them and make adaptations to your team or the process in order to get the work done.
Yeah, the first two here, base level and tentpole, are really kind of the vegetables that you have to eat with your dinner in order to get to the dessert, which is opportunistic moments. And the more that we're doing our job, and this is all over the place in DraftKings for sure, but even in my world, the more we're doing our job on the first two, the more we can allow the marketers to take advantage of those opportunistic moments, both culturally and sports-wise. I can assure you nobody at HelloFresh knows when NFL starts, but every single person in the business DraftKings knows the first kickoff. Team architecture. So we're getting into the how now. So we've talked a little bit about the work and getting a general sense of what's coming down the pike for your teams, what they're already supporting. So what do you have? If you're like me, you've stepped into, I've done this 3 times now in 3 different companies, but I've stepped into situations where I'm not building from scratch per se. There are existing assets there and existing people there. So assessing what you have in terms of legacy, DraftKings, for instance, HelloFresh for that matter as well. These are performance-driven companies. They had a moment in time in that business when they had to just keep the lights on. And they got over that hurdle, and they needed to become a company that now wanted to build brand affinity. So what's left on the floor, when I walk in, are a group of production artists. They're not a heavily conceptual team. So assessing what's on the floor right at that moment, minders, grinders, and finders. The grinders pumping out assets, finders if you can find them. There might be some folks in the audience who have just never really been given a chance, that do have that deeper creative sensibility that could easily transport themselves over that dotted line into the more conceptual world. And then, of course, assessing what's needed. So through skills matrixing, you now know the work that's coming in. You know the skill set you have on the floor. Where are those gaps? Sarah and I went through at DraftKings about a year ago. We went through this moment in time where somebody came through town selling mobile video, and suddenly everything we did needed to be animated and like yesterday. And so for us, we needed to fill that gap very quickly and do an assessment. Is that better to just freelance in the short term and build out a full-time team? In our case, it was. And so otherwise, resourcing for peak volume. So not only the people on the floor in the moment, but how do you build out the light gray at the bottom, that freelance network? Those guys. And if you've been in the business for a while and you've met enough creatives and copywriters and so forth, you're going to build yourself a great big safety net that's really going to help you for the flex that needs to happen. The last thing I'd say, and I've been doing a ton of interviewing recently at HelloFresh, which is wonderful for the company, not great for me, the elasticity in role definition. So when somebody comes in to sit down for a senior design role or a junior design role alike, I want them to understand that a company of our size, you're going to be doing lots of things that are probably above what you're used to doing. These are going to be reach tasks and reach projects for you, and that's wonderful. That's why you should join a company like ours. you're also probably going to be doing some stuff that you did 5 or 10 years ago in your career. That's just the nature of our business. There needs to be the elasticity built in there so that times of peak volume where it's all performance and we're trying to get out some giant paid social campaign, we need all hands on deck to do that. That's the model that we're building.
If you can go back, I'd just like to add for elasticity, I think that also applies to skill sets. So it's hard to find unicorns, but if you have them, you want to keep them, and if you can find them, you want to get them. Unicorns are people who can do everything. We're lucky at DraftKings to have a few of those folks on our teams. They're really strong designers. They're really great conceptual thinkers. They also can do animation. They also dabble in front-end development. So they're really key members of our team that we look to in heavy periods of time. They also provide great mentorship to the rest of the team, which is fantastic. And Bill mentioned interviewing as well. So I think that that's an important thing to poke around with when you're screening candidates, is gauging their appetite for diversifying what they know how to do and their willingness to learn new things.
Sarah knows where to find all the unicorns, so hit her up after. So process planning. So now we talked about the work. We talked about the teams we're putting on the floor. What is our role in this? Why, as creative ops professionals, are we uniquely positioned to even have a say in this? And how do we wrap that in process? So first thing is building process for the team you want. So again, I've stepped into a few organizations now where there's either been a spoken or unspoken process, largely down to handshake deals that a channel owner will come down and say, I need this, and it's due Friday, and that was, soup to nuts, the process there. So not wanting that in the future and wanting to put more rigor into that and understanding what's in your pipeline, build a process for the team that you want that allows for that all-important brand time. Otherwise, performance will always rule. Revenue generating is always going to dominate, especially in companies like ours, even in Chipotle these days. And so you really want to have that time where you can park brand work that absolutely must happen if you're to grow that brand. Agility, I think Dana was saying earlier, like that's in our world as well. Workflow agility. So I like to think of it in terms of t-shirt size. Every project gets a small, medium, or large right out of the gate, and how do we tackle that? And then even within that, we're not worried about getting through gate 2 before we get to gate 3. We're just not built like that. We want to apply some rigor. We want to train those business behaviors, but you need to be agile in designing workflows for the work that's coming down the pike. This is a big one. This is a Sarah one. I have to give her all the credit. But onboarding for speed and contribution. So when Sarah and I work together, it's one thing to bring on flexible freelance networks. It's another thing to be lucky enough to have headcount and start bringing folks in the door. But what you do with them and how quickly you get them ramped up, to the extent that you can do that, that's how much they're going to help your cause. So whether it's through designers knowing brand guidelines in and out, or a copywriter coming in and learning tone and voice right away, the quicker and the better job you can do at onboarding these folks, the more that's going to help you. And then we had to throw project management in here because 2 of Sarah's project managers are out in the audience. But these are the governors of your process. These are, I know it's said all too often, but not enough yet. They're the unsung heroes. So whatever you put into place, these folks are the ones that are in the trenches every day, touching every bit of work. They're the knowledge centers, not only for the individual projects, but also for the greater pipeline, your project portfolio. So I can't stress that enough, that when you're thinking about these things, at least in our worlds where these are married together, that creative and project management go really strongly hand in hand.
I think in terms of onboarding, just to reiterate, you'll see a huge return on your investment there if you can make the time to onboard people properly. They'll feel supported and set up for success, and you'll be able to get more work from them more quickly than you would if you just threw them into the deep end. And then project managers are your team. They're your people. They're going to do everything that you need them to do and clear the way, and really empower them to help them know how to enforce the processes that you're putting into place, and also know how to identify where and when you can bend and break the processes to get work done. So we've talked about who, we've talked about what, we've talked about the process a bit. We should take a look at how performance work compares to conceptual work. So performance work at DraftKings is done mostly by our production team. They are really strong designers, They're focused mostly on volume rather than ideation. They're consistent performers that don't need a lot of hand-holding. You can kind of set them on cruise control. They're intimately familiar with the brand guidelines, and they self-police themselves to make sure that the assets that they're turning out always are upholding the brand standards that have been set across the business. They also have a savviness to the nuances between what each channel needs. So best practices for social can be very different than best practices for CRM, and they know both and can pivot quickly and do those things. On the screen, we'll just put up a few examples of the work. I'm constantly impressed with the group at DraftKings. The speed and the volume at which they work is incredible. They manage outputting work for all of our marketing channels, producing assets for the site from marquees in the lobby to site skins. They partner really well with our social team and collaborate on templates for them, as well as doing bespoke creative in the moment, like the Tiger graphic or the Todd Gurley end of year fantasy football award stuff. So they're really good partners. They're going to provide a huge amount of value to your business, especially in that lower marketing effort area.
Yeah, I think the takeaway here is done well. This is a waterfall approach that briefs will come in one directionally from the business, and what we and the project managers are putting in front of the designers should be enough for them to execute on the job and get the work out. This is about volume. It's about accuracy. It's a little. I would pull back on the conceptual thinking here. Unlike brand creative, so. Different here, we need a lot of agility here. We need to build in the time in our workflow for the important things to happen. Brainstorming is critical for us. It's something that's also brand new for HelloFresh and was at DraftKings too. The idea that a copywriter would get together with a designer or multiple of them and go away and think on a solution was kind of new. We had to train those behaviors, but first thing to do there is to make sure you're building into the workflow time for that to happen. There needs to be more breathing room in those types of workflows. This is going to be high-minded, top-of-funnel work, so it's also bi-directional. So we very often will get a brief from the business. The difference being that this brief for conceptual brand thinking is more around a business problem that we're trying to solve for. On the performance side, you often see a business owner supplying you with the solution. They want you to go execute it. I think there's a time and place for each of those, but largely that's fine. Here, we're talking about business problems. It could be around, in our worlds, it could be around acquisition, it could be about retention, it could be around a single audience segment that we're having trouble reaching. This team these are high-minded conceptual thinkers. They want that problem so they can go away and think on it. Likewise, they are also doing that. These are not house cats. These guys are out in the business. They're out there as much as we are, getting to know the CRM team, the product team, the paid digital team. And so they can start to see thematically things that are affecting the business and maybe putting some drag on us. They will also pitch ideas back into the business that the business has never asked for. And I think that's an appropriate state for this group. That's where the real value add is. So DraftKings last year, as a total performance engine, deciding to become a bit of a brand machine, put together two campaigns for NFL season. One was a super serious, you'll see in a second, super serious, very dark, anthemic, exactly what you'd think of from sport. Could have just as well been a Gatorade commercial, no offense to DraftKings. This one, super funny. They took the other perspective here and they said, like, how do we reach some of the people who are just more casual users who don't want to be like inundated with stats? And so they came up with this character called Dr. AFKings, and the doctor would go around diagnosing fantasy sports fans with different things, like this poor fellow has ED, which is he's suffering from earnings dysfunction.
Just one other thing. I think that while your conceptual folks might be focused more in that upper funnel space, working on brand work, I think when they have great ideas, there's going to be an eagerness to extend those ideas into the performance space. So just make sure that they're prepared to think about that as well, and give direction to your production team to do so.
Yeah, it's a very good point.
Optimizing operations. So the folks in this room, we're the people who make this happen. All your planning and preparation that you've done should carve the path for your project management team to do what they do best and allow them to really enforce the process. It will allow them to take ownership of casting, matching the right talent with the right project, as well as having an awareness of resourcing. So looking at your resource planning 2 weeks out, 4 weeks out, 6 weeks out to know what the bandwidth is and know if you need to supplement your staff with freelance resources. While they're your people on the ground, you need to be operating at a helicopter level as well as a satellite level. Helicopter, you're being there to support your team, being available for them to manage up to you, as well as communicating down to them stuff that's going on around the business. At the satellite level, you need to really have your eyes and ears open within the organization to be prepared for stuff that's on the horizon. So long-term planning. Are there changes coming up in your product portfolio? Are there things happening externally that would have an impact on your business that you need to plan for? Again, just always thinking 3 steps ahead to be able to plan and accommodate the work more efficiently and more effectively.
Yeah, and I think that's an incredibly important point, is resist the urge to get in the trenches, to touch every project. You're negating your value in doing that. You have to put trusted partners under you, project managers, as well as the creative team, and get above that, get out of that, get a higher view of that, understand how all the puzzle pieces fit together. And then the last piece is the flexible freelance. So as you continue in your career from younger to me, you'll meet tons and tons of people. Establish these relationships. Treat your freelancers really well because they're critically important to the work that we're doing, especially these days at HelloFresh. So the takeaways from all this, again, coming back full circle, like we largely have performance teams. We want to break in some branding. Chipotle, we had a brand team that never touched a performance asset until it was a little too late. How do we marry those two? Where's the harmony? Where are we getting the harmony in that? So nimble, elastic workflows. I think that's critical here. We need to adjust and readjust almost daily. I remember a time last year before NFL launched where Sarah and I were resourcing twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon, because the situation would change by noon and we'd have a totally different project priority. Build your team for purpose. I mean, that's entirely what this presentation is around, but be really smart. We've had times where we didn't have headcount. We just had maybe 1 or 2 or 3 people that we could bring in. We had to be incredibly selective and prudent in those decisions. We also had times where the opposite is, we could be guilty of the opposite, where we have 10 headcount. How are we going to use them? Maybe not using them all at once. Maybe learning the business and phasing those out. But build your team for the purpose. And then upstream visibility. The best thing that we can do, is to get ourselves out of that just receiving relationship with our business partners. If all I'm doing is a ticket taker, if I'm just somebody who gets a project brief and then passes it on to our creative team, I've done nothing. I need to get upstream, and I hear that we're pursuing this or we're pursuing that, or we're talking about growing in these directions or those. Even if I just know a big thing is coming up in the spring and I can put a placeholder on the calendar, all those things are critically, they're vital to the team and to understanding how to resource for them. Last thing, and not just because Greg and Abigail are here, but project management. I can't stress this enough for myself anyway. I know it's been critical for me to even do things like being here. I need to know that I have a trusted team back at the office that is carrying out everything as it should be. They're calm, they're level-headed, they're field generals, they're knowledge centers. These are your people that are going to really help you tie it all together in order to have a team that supports both brand and performance marketing. That's it.
Thank you.